Here's a long-form, commentary-style script designed for retention, watch time, audience loyalty, and a more human, opinion-driven delivery. It avoids sounding like a news bulletin and focuses on analysis, questions, and storytelling. Writing. Why Queen Letizia is reportedly fuming over Leonor's new independence. There was one moment this week that caught my attention more than any official palace statement. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a military ceremony. And it wasn't even something Princess Leonor said. It was what she didn't do. For years, every public appearance involving Leonor seemed carefully managed, carefully timed, and carefully controlled. Every step felt connected to a larger strategy designed by the Spanish royal household. But recently, something feels different. The future Queen of Spain appears to be stepping into a new phase of her life, one where she's making more of her own decisions, building her own image, and creating a public identity that doesn't entirely depend on palace guidance. And according to growing royal speculation, that's exactly what's creating tension behind the scenes. Because if the reports are accurate, Queen Letizia is not entirely comfortable with how quickly her daughter is becoming independent. And honestly, I think this story is much bigger than a simple disagreement between mother and daughter. I think we're watching a struggle that every royal family eventually faces. The moment the heir stops being a child and starts becoming their own person. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something clear. Nobody outside palace walls truly knows what private conversations are taking place. But what we can analyze is the pattern. And lately, that pattern has become impossible to ignore. Because Leonor isn't the same teenager Spain watched a few years ago. She's becoming a young woman with her own experiences, her own responsibilities, and perhaps most importantly, her own influence. And influence changes everything. If you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe, I post every day. Because what we're seeing right now isn't just another royal headline. It's a turning point that could shape the future of the Spanish monarchy for years. Now here's what fascinates me. When Queen Letizia first became queen, one of her biggest priorities was protecting her daughters. Some people praised that approach. Others criticized it. But nobody could deny that Letizia was deeply involved in almost every aspect of Leonor's public life. You could see it during official events. You could see it in speeches. You could even see it in body language. The image presented to the public was clear. Leonor was being carefully prepared for her future role. And in fairness, that strategy worked. Today, Leonor is one of the most popular young royals in Europe. But here's the problem. The strategies that help raise an heir aren't always the same strategies that help launch a future queen. At some point, preparation has to give way to independence. And I think that's the stage we're entering now. Look at what's happened over the past few years. Military training, international engagements, extended periods away from home, new responsibilities, new relationships, new experiences. Every one of those developments moves Leonor slightly further away from parental supervision. That's not a scandal, that's adulthood. But adulthood can be uncomfortable for parents. Even royal ones. Especially royal ones. Because for ordinary families, a child becoming independent affects the household. For a royal family, it affects an institution. And that's where things become interesting. One question I've been asking myself is this. What happens when Princess Leonor starts making decisions based on what Leonor wants rather than what the palace prefers? That may sound like a small distinction. It's not. It's enormous. Because monarchies survive on consistency. They thrive on predictability. They depend on carefully managed images. Independent personalities can complicate that. Not because they're bad, but because they're harder to control. And let's be honest, Leonor's growing popularity is creating a dynamic nobody could have fully predicted. She's becoming a star in her own right. Not just an extension of her parents. That's a huge difference. In many ways, it reminds me of what happened in other royal families. Look at Prince William, look at Catherine, look at younger generations of royals across Europe. Eventually, the public stops seeing them as children of the monarch. They become major figures themselves. And once that happens, influence shifts. Now here's my hot take. I think some of the media coverage is focusing on the wrong question. The question isn't whether Queen Letizia is angry. The real question is why Leonor's independence suddenly feels so significant. And I think the answer is simple. For the first time, people can realistically imagine what a Leonor era might look like. Not Philippe's reign, not Letizia's influence. A Leonor era. That's new. And that changes the conversation. Because every appearance she makes now is being analyzed differently. People aren't asking, How is the princess doing? They're asking, what kind of queen will she become? Those are very different questions. Another thing that stands out to me is how Leonor's military training has transformed public perception. Before, she was often viewed through a family lens. Now she's increasingly viewed through a leadership lens. That shift matters a lot, because leadership creates confidence. Confidence creates independence. And independence creates tension when expectations don't align. Again, that's not unique to royalty. It's human nature. I actually think many parents watching this can relate. Imagine spending years guiding your child, protecting them, helping shape their future, then suddenly realizing they don't need your guidance in the same way anymore. That's difficult, even when it's healthy, even when it's necessary. Now let's zoom out for a second. Because there's another layer to this story that I don't think gets enough attention. The media loves conflict. Conflict generates clicks. Conflict generates headlines. Conflict generates engagement. But what if what's happening isn't a crisis at all? What if this is simply the natural transition from princess to future queen? Think about that. Every future monarch eventually reaches a moment where they must establish their own identity. Not their parents' identity, their own. And sometimes that process looks messy from the outside. Not because anyone is failing, but because growth often looks like disagreement before it looks like progress. One comparison that keeps coming to mind is the contrast between Leonor and other young public figures today. Look at how carefully people like Prince William and Catherine balance tradition with modernization. Look at how public figures outside royalty build personal brands separate from institutions. Even someone like Mr. Beast understands that audiences connect with authenticity, not perfection. Authenticity. The future of public influence increasingly belongs to people who feel real. And Leonor's growing independence may actually strengthen her long-term position rather than weaken it. That's why I think some observers are misreading the situation. They see tension. I see evolution. They see conflict. I see transition. Those aren't the same thing. And here's something else. The stronger Leonor becomes individually, the stronger the monarchy may become institutionally. That sounds contradictory, but history suggests it's often true. Successful future monarchs usually earn public trust before they inherit the crown. Not after. And earning trust requires personal credibility, not just inherited status. That's exactly what Leonor appears to be building. Step by step, year by year, responsibility by responsibility. Which brings me back to Queen Letizia. If reports about frustration are even partially accurate, I suspect the issue isn't independence itself. It's speed. The speed of change. The speed of growing influence. The speed of public expectations. Because everything around Leonor is accelerating. And acceleration can be unsettling. Especially when the stakes involve an entire monarchy. But here's my final thought. The biggest mistake people make when analyzing royal families is assuming every disagreement signals a crisis. Sometimes a disagreement signals growth. Sometimes friction means something is working. And sometimes the very thing causing concern today becomes the reason for success tomorrow. When I look at Leonor's journey, that's what I see. Not rebellion, not scandal, not palace chaos. I see a future queen gradually stepping out of the shadow of her parents. And honestly, that was always going to happen. The real surprise isn't that Leonor is becoming independent. The real surprise is that anyone expected otherwise. Because history tells us something important. Every future monarch eventually reaches the moment where they stop following the path and start helping define it. And judging by everything we've seen lately, Princess Leonor may have already reached that moment. Did you like this feature?